Hello, my name is Marcelo Daldoce, and I am an art instructor and artist, and I will give to you an idea of how I deal with watercolor, one of the mediums that I have been teaching the most and one of my passions, because I love how watercolor you can be dealing with control, but also letting things to be loose and deal with surprises. So I will talk about values, but what I will really talk most, it's about the mise en place. The mise en place, it's a term for restaurants. Chefs use this term. It basically means put things in its place. It's a French term, and it's basically about the plan. So what I usually say is, if you have everything planned in watercolor, or at least this technique, you will have a better chance to have a good result. So what I usually say is 90% of thinking and making your puddles, 10% of actually painting. So when you are painting, you are absolutely sure about what you're doing. So 3 steps or 3 values is how I divide my system. This is more for classes. When I paint on my own, I might use more layers, but 3 steps, 3 layers is a way for me to explain how I can be more direct with the application of watercolor. So right now I'm just mixing all my colors, mostly primary colors, and the goal is to get colds and warms, and it's the same value. So one of the problems of watercolor is the overworking or the correction. And this way, the first layer, as you see, which is more abstract, it will be all painted at once with all the colors connected. So the key is change colors and connect and leave highlights. So as you see, everything is very wet, and I have an angle which is around 40 degrees, and I'm both connecting and both changing colors and leaving highlights. Highlights for her left arm, highlights for her breast, highlights for her forehead. Everything it's painted with this whole connection. So as long as I have that puddle on the bottom wet, I am safe and I can keep everything wet and connected. Also, while it's still wet, I can lift, which is a little tricky because lifting is sculpting with water. But as long as you are keeping that wet, you can lift. And basically, as you see, I'm rounding and I just make the edges a little more soft. And connect everything and bring some water in some areas that it's missing. And then after I'm done with my layer 1, which, as I said, is the overall tone, it's the skin tone, then I will mix another puddle, which is my middle tone or shadow, thinking about consistency. So the consistency is around cream, milk cream. And from this puddle, I will create most of my painting. What I usually say is, if this section, which is the middle, is correct, your painting will be a successful painting. So as you see, there are warms, there are more yellows, there are more reds. And then after I put a little bit of water in her hair, then I start to connect everything. From the more oxide, more orange painting from her hair, I will bring this all the way down, almost like a print machine, like an inkjet machine. Everything is painted all the same, all connected. So I'm not bouncing from face, arm, leg, everything. It's a continuous flow. And because it's all wet, I can connect everything, connect that with her eye, connect the shadow from the nose with everything. And then, as you see, connecting the shadow from the neck with the shadow from the shoulder and the arm And while I'm painting, I'm also softening all the edges. The edges are all painted all together. So here a good example of shifts of temperature. The left side of the breast is colder, the middle close to the core shadow, it's warmer. All painted at once. Rembrandt have done this sort of a shift of colds, which is close to the light, to the core shadow that's warmer. The same thing is happening here. Close to her neck is warm, moves to her breast on the bottom, it's cold, and then the core shadow it's warmer. And soft edges. So it's a everything happen at the same time. So what I usually say is, even though that I'm trying to explain the concept, it takes a while to get used to this, because it's a continuous shifts of, like, I'm now putting a little bit of dark, so then I can see a little bit more of her arm, which has a slightly reflected light. Look how the top of her left arm shadow, it's colder, and when it moves to the bottom, it gets warmer, almost like a little orange. All connected, breast, arm, shadow, all one continuous connection. Slowly connecting with her hand and the shadow of her leg. And there's a shift of cold on the top of her leg and warm on the bottom. So as you see, all big shapes too. And I use a medium brush here, number maybe 8, 9. No tiny brushes. Tiny brushes are only for tiny details. This is a lifting of reflected light, which only works if it's still wet. Now a colder color for the shadow, and all connected to her legs, and a few touches. Toes are usually warmer. So at this stage I will think about the third layer, the final details, the form, which is thicker. You can imagine something like maple syrup, maybe honey, depending on what dark you need. And slowly adding these tiny little darks, and as you see, it's not just making her mouth, but tiny little dots of dark, and it blurs naturally. I don't need to manipulate the painting. The painting blurs in a way that is just, it's basically gravity that's pushing the pigment. Slowly adding more darks, and look how I put water before, which is gonna give me this wet on wet feeling, and then I can add the darks from her hair. Slightly blur on the left side here of her hair, and then this is all connect also to the shadow of her neck. A few darks in these specific places, and the goal for this is just create that extra volume that it's missing. I don't need to repaint everything, just that area that it's missing. I also avoid to just paint and leave my brush stroke as it is. So I usually put some water, as you see, and then when I paint, it will blur naturally, and that takes away the stiffness. I am more a fan of this sort of accidental mark that is not illustrative, or is not, you might say, realistic. And I am more a fan of this sort of what the medium usually, it's very welcome to do, the surprises. So sometimes some marks are not what you might expect, but that is good, because the goal is not to make a photographic image, but an image that it will be made through expressive marks, and then through those expressive marks you would see three-dimensional form. A few more details which are not that dark, just slightly light, and almost finishing the painting, a core shadow here for her legs, just to create that extra three-dimensional form. And as you see, it's getting more realistic. It's just getting more close to what the model's light and volume was. So pay attention to the colds and warms, especially on her breast. And I think the shift of colds and warms are a good secret for this painting. Thank you for watching, and I teach at the League, and thank you.